Okay, everybody here. So we start our 40th Friends of Museum meeting, and some people participated from the first one. So we are very happy because we learned a lot. And today will be the last part of the presentation to Georges. Please.
Very good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for coming here to the Museum of the Russian Cultural Center. This, as Margarita mentioned, is the third presentation in our series of Canvas Wings and Iron Personalities, which is examining the history of aviation during the Tsarist era, roughly 1900 to 1918. And today we will also take a look at the legacy of some of those early Tsarist aviators and pilots and how their career continued after the revolution. Now, our first presentation featured Sikorsky and most of his accomplishments. And we were fortunate enough that he was sent a copy. All right, so our first presentation talking about Igor Sikorsky and his inventions was read by his son, pictured here, who viewed it and then sent us this wonderful greeting. And I'll read that to you. He said, "I would like to invite you to watch a video produced by George Zupko, that's my name, and Georgy Grigoriev, entitled Canvas Wings and Iron Personalities. The program features the early accomplishments of my father with the development of the Legacy aircraft and its service in World War I. I would also like to thank the Congress of Russian Americans for inducting my father into the CRA Hall of Fame of Outstanding Russian Americans for his contribution to the United States in the field of aviation." This just happened a couple months ago. So we were very pleased and very honored that he took the time to watch our video and to send us this wonderful commentary. Okay, this does seem to be working. So what this is, ladies and gentlemen, is a shot from the air shows that were very, very popular in the United States in the 20s and the 30s. These air shows became wildly popular for several reasons. Number one, there was a great surplus of World War I aircraft after World War I, so aircraft were extremely cheap to buy. There were a lot of unemployed pilots as well. And if you think about it, people being alive in the 20s, there were thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that had never seen an airplane actually fly. So these air shows were a big deal. And they did the craziest things during these air shows. This was one of the stunts that they performed. Other stunts were known as barnstorming. All right, now I want to tell you that he did survive. This was all a stage. This was a stage barn. The aircraft was modified so that the wings shear off. So as dangerous as it looks, it was actually pretty safe. As you can see, he crawled out with no damage. He's even wearing a tie. All right. So this kind of entertainment was huge. And like I said, there were plenty of pilots and plenty of aircraft to go around. And just one more sequence of these guys. And here's a nice close-up. You can kind of see how the wings shear away. The fuselage continues to go through the building, and he comes out the other side, a more experienced pilot. All right. Now, one of the major designers to come to America because of the revolution was, of course, Igor Sikorsky. And he started his own company, Sikorsky Aero Corporation, and he began designing a lot of small airplanes, but his big interest was larger aircraft. And I want to go back to the First World War for a moment. Is
this the one you want?
No, next one.
Previous one. Igor Sikorsky. Okay, this one. Okay.
Yeah, this is Sikorsky at an early age. His most prominent design in World War I was the Albertovitch which was the first 4-engine, long-range reconnaissance aircraft developed. It was originally designed as a commercial airliner, and it would have more than likely been the first world's commercial airliner had not the war started in 1914. There were only a few of these aircraft available when the war began. They were used mainly as reconnaissance aircraft, flying way behind German lines, taking pictures, and these photographs were immensely helpful to the general staff and actually ensured a couple of victories. This aircraft was also remarkable in that it had a small hatch here on the side in which the flight engineer could actually exit the aircraft in flight in case the engines needed to be worked on. All right, and this actually came in to play significantly during one particular mission. An Ilya Muromets was hit by ground fire as well as attacked by enemy aircraft. The pilot was wounded. The co-pilot gallantly draped himself over the pilot's body so that he wouldn't get hit by any other fighter machine gun bullets. The co-pilot, in the process of doing that, was also wounded. And they had problems with one of the engines. So they had both a pilot and co-pilot wounded. The flight engineer, who had experienced a broken arm in the combat, then exited the aircraft, walked out onto the wing, and for 30 minutes, while in flight, worked on this engine and enabled the aircraft to make it back to base. And all of the crew members were awarded the St. George Cross, 4th class. So this aircraft had tremendous influence also on the future of aviation. If you notice, the cockpit is enclosed. This enclosed cockpit did not become standardized in the aircraft industry until the 30s. This aircraft first came out in 1913. So it was very, very ahead of its time, and would have premiered to be, as I said, the world's first commercial airliner. With the revolution, the Bolsheviks eventually took over the factory where the Ilya Muromets were built, and so the imperial forces soon had a shortage of parts and were unable to complete any other combat missions towards the end of the war. So that by 1922, basically all of the Ilya Muromets were grounded for lack of spare parts. However, it did provide a wave of the future in the 4 engines and its long range. Now, Sikorsky also brought many other ideas to the aviation world. Building the Ilya Muromets gave him a large amount of experience in building. This is a great photo of the Ilya Muromets in action here. This is a later version. You can see there's a couple of machine guns mounted on top for its defense. And another shot. Now these gentlemen up here, although it looks pretty crazy, they are actually holding on to some guy wires that run the length of the fuselage here. So it's not quite as dangerous as it seems. And this is what I want to talk about next. Sikorsky's next venture was building flying boats. And since, as we know, most major cities are near water, flying boats were a great way to develop commercial aviation after the First World War. Now, also you might want to notice these 2 structures behind it. Does anyone recognize what those are? Exactly. Golden Gate Bridge, circa 1935.
Supposed to be.
What's that?
Supposed to be Golden Gate.
Well, yeah, it's on its way. They got a little work to do. At any rate, this was Sikorsky's flying boat, and he became quite prosperous from this business. Now, I want you to think about for a moment your last commercial flight that you took in an airliner, all right? And particularly, I want you to focus on your last in-flight meal. And if you would, close your eyes. I want you to picture that plastic tray with the plastic silverware, the plastic cup, that piece of cardboard that looks like meat, and the soggy vegetables. Okay, so kind of get that in your mind. All right? That's dining these days. This was dining during the China Clipper era, during the trans-Pacific flights. A little bit nicer. Right now, obviously, this is first class, and obviously those tickets cost quite a bit of money. It was actually a several-day journey, as they had to refuel several times on the way across the Pacific. And another benefit of these flying boats was that it built up an aviation infrastructure throughout the Pacific. Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines all became major air bases for the flying boats, and then that transitioned, of course, to airfields in World War II. Now, this glamorous way of travel unfortunately ended with the beginning of World War II, as all commercial flying came to a screeching halt. There were many interesting stories that I want to get more into about flying boats that were stuck when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, somewhere in the Pacific, because they obviously couldn't fly safely. One of them actually flew from the Philippines rather than flying back to the U.S. They flew from the Philippines to India, to Africa, Europe, and then back to America. They had to go back around the other way. So a very harrowing time, and it brought this magnificent era to an untimely end. The base for these flying boats was actually right here in San Francisco. This is Treasure Island. And as you can see, one of the flying boats, let's just keep moving forward here. All right. This is Seversky. I'll talk about him in just a minute. But I just want to add one thing that Sikorsky commented about his greatest achievement, the helicopters. And we actually have a model of a helicopter back here. His HE-53 is on display here at the museum. But Sikorsky said about the helicopter versus airplanes, and I quote, "If a man is stranded in the wilderness, an airplane can come over and drop flowers on him. A helicopter, however, can rescue him. And over the years there have been thousands, if not tens of thousands of people's lives who have been rescued by helicopters." And we all owe a debt to Sikorsky's vision. He actually was inspired to build a helicopter from a book that his mother read to him when he was a child, the Jules Verne's classic, The Clippers of the Clouds. Yes, now I want to move on to Seversky.
George, did
Yes.
you explain who is there?
Oh, okay, well, we got a little ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back a little bit. All right, this is Alexander Seversky. Next to him is his father, who was known as an entertainer. He had a singing group and was quite successful at it. Now, Alexander was born Alexander Nikolaevich Prokofiev, but he changed his name to his father's stage name, which was Seversky. He adopted that name. He also added the little D-E, the D, in front of it, I guess because that sounded so continental. And anyway, we shall refer to him as Seversky in the rest of this program.
And this is his son?
That is his brother Georgi, who became known as the singing pilot, and actually Ryan did a bit about him on his last presentation. And there is a recording of his songs here at the museum. So they had quite a family. Nikolai's father was also very well noted because he was one of the first Russians in the world to buy an aircraft, a private aircraft. He bought this aircraft in 1911. All right, and young Alexander was flying by the ripe old age of 14. When he became old enough, he followed his family's military tradition and enrolled in the Naval Academy, majoring in aeronautical engineering. When the war broke out, he was stationed in the Gulf of Riga, and he began flying combat missions. This was the plane that he flew into combat. Back there. Yeah, this is the plane he flew into combat, and this is him as a pilot in his father's aircraft. Now, on his very first combat mission, he encountered a German destroyer. He dropped a couple of his bombs, you can see they were mounted on the side here. They caused minimal damage to the destroyer. However, the destroyer pretty much riddled Seversky's aircraft. He had to crash land. Fortunately, he was picked up by some Russian sailors, and he was able to survive. His observer, unfortunately, when he crash landed, one of these bombs exploded, killing the observer, and it blew off Seversky's right leg. But he was able to survive, and eventually wanted to return to combat. He was fitted with an artificial leg and requested to return to combat. Well, of course, his superior officers denied that. And somehow, though, this escapade, came up to the attention of the Tsar. And he wanted to know why this pilot couldn't fly, especially since at an air show, Seversky wanted to prove that he could still fly. So at a military air show, he made an unauthorized solo flight and made his own little air show, culminating with him flying under a bridge, which scared the passengers on a local ferry half to death. And this caused quite a stir. Now, this isn't the actual aircraft, this is a reproduction, but this is basically what happened flying under that bridge, and created quite a stir. Well, as I said, it made it up to the imperial court. The Tsar wanted to know exactly what happened. He demanded to see the full report. He read the full report, and after he read it, he wrote on the side, and I quote, "Read, impressed, let him fly, Nikolai." And so Seversky returned to combat, and in order to prove the Tsar's faith in him, he scored his first victory within 3 days of returning to combat. Seversky went on to fly a total of 58 combat missions and claimed 13 victories, aerial victories, although only 6 of those were confirmed. But even with that, he still ranks as the highest scoring Russian naval ace in World War I. And this was the main aircraft that he flew. Here he is recovering in the hospital, and once he returned to combat. Now, after he returned to combat, he had an unfortunate accident riding in a wooden wagon, which smashed into another wagon, and that wagon busted up his other leg. So he had one artificial leg and one busted up leg. Now, in 1917, the Imperial Navy transferred Seversky to the United States as a naval attaché in Washington, D.C. Now, this move undoubtedly saved him from the chaos of the Bolshevik Reign of Terror. However, it did provide or confront him with several bad conditions. Number one, his employer, the Imperial Russian Navy, no longer existed. He was out of a job. All right. Number two, he was out of his country. He couldn't go back to his country. He would be shot. Number three, he had one leg blown off. The other one was busted up. So what did Seversky do? He became an airshow pilot. As I mentioned, airshow pilots were in big demand. Seversky's flying skill was unmatched, and that's what he did for a couple years. Then he also took his engineering experience, forming his own company, and began producing aviation instrumentation, different instruments. His instrumentation at that time was pretty crude. Most planes had a compass and an airspeed indicator, and that was pretty much it. So he worked very heavily on that, and then began designing his own aircraft. First small aircraft, and then he became more famous when he started developing faster aircraft that were meant to be fighters. Now, this was his premier design, the P-35. This plane ended up being so fast that it won the Bendix Air Races 3 times in the late 30s. Bendix Air Race is the equivalent of the Indy 500 or the Le Mans. This was the big prize. This aircraft won it 3 years in a row. Now, he wanted to sell these aircraft to the United States Air Corps. They were interested. They bought a few of them, but a big production was not forthcoming. So Seversky went to sell these planes in other countries. Sweden and the Philippines, I believe, bought some of these aircraft. And they served briefly in the United States Air Corps. Now, Seversky's main focus, besides being an engineer, he also was a visionary. And he could see the future of aviation and what was needed. And he realized that the key to winning a war in the future would be through air power. He wrote this book, which is here at the museum, called Victory Through Air Power. He wrote this in it was published in 1942, and it basically spelled out the way a country should, number one, industrialize, the aircraft it should manufacture, the types, how to disperse them, all the details. And it became a bestseller on the New York Times list. But more importantly, this book was read by a lot of government officials, and it became instrumental in some of the decisions, the policy decisions that were made during the Casablanca Conference. And Walt Disney actually made a movie about this, and that movie was also shown at the Casablanca Conference. Now, the B-35, despite its outstanding performance, the aircraft was just somewhat being interested by the United States Air Corps. The United States Air Corps at that time was focused on heavy bombers. They wanted long-range, four-engine bombers that could fly long distances, and they believed that if you gave that bomber enough guns, it could protect itself in combat, which the German Luftwaffe proved was a false theory. Seversky, being the combat veteran that he was, knew that you needed fighter aircraft to accompany those bombers, and that's one of the reasons why he designed the T-35. However, with the Air Corps not being really interested in it, and foreign buyers being somewhat scarce, he ended up pouring a lot of money into this project, a lot of his own money, as well as considerable company funds. And the company became a little concerned about the money that was going out, and so they removed Seversky as the chairman of the board of his own corporation. Adding insult to injury, they renamed it Republic Aviation, although Seversky did retain his position as chief engineer. So he was basically booted out of the financial part and still kept on as an engineer. Seversky also brought in other well-known designers. Oh, I'm sorry, this skipped a little bit. Seversky uses artificial leg quite well in flying, and he also bragged to other pilots that he was 25% less vulnerable to injuries because part of his leg was wooden. And it also saved his life on a couple of occasions. While he was leaving Russia, his train was stopped by a group of Bolshevik soldiers who ordered everyone off, and they were going to shoot all the imperial officers that were found on the train. Seversky got off, but fortunately the leader of this group of Bolsheviks recognized Seversky as the naval aviator with one leg, and he instructed his men, "This man has fought for the motherland. We do not shoot officers like him." And so Seversky was able to survive. The second time it saved his life, although not quite as dangerous, was probably as frightening. He was at a Washington party when he spied a very attractive woman, and he went up to ask her to dance. And this is the woman right here, Evelyn. Now, he had an artificial leg, and he did not know that she was a professional dancer. Now, I don't know if it was Seversky's dancing skills or lack of it. My guess is it was his charm and wit, because they became married several months later. Later, Seversky became involved with Billy Mitchell during his controversial bombing experiments, and also worked on the fine art of air-to-air refueling, which was being done in the 20s and then later in the 30s. This is him as a pilot doing one of his, this looks more like a studio shot, and And again, the P-35, which in my opinion was one of the prettiest aircraft of the 30s. However, as I said, the Air Corps was not that interested in it. Now, with the failure of the P-35, Seversky and another engineer that he brought over, Alexander Kartveli, worked on a successor, the P-47 Thunderbolt, which became one of the most iconic fighters of the United States during the Second World War. It holds several distinctions. First and foremost, it was the most well-produced fighter, with over 15,000 being built. And there was a special factory built just to make the P-47s in Evansville, Indiana, which is my home state, and it was so prominent in the economy and the war effort that the state of Indiana, the state legislature, decided in one of its most enlightened moves to make the P-47 the official state aircraft of Indiana. I'm not kidding, that's a fact. There are also several other states that have adopted state aircraft, so it's becoming a thing, like the state bird, state flower, etc. At any rate, the P-47 is the state aircraft of Indiana. It was also an aircraft that could absorb tremendous battle damage. There was one instance, a pilot named Robert Johnson was attacked by German fighters. He caught on fire, was heavily damaged. He wanted to bail out, but his canopy was jammed, so he couldn't bail out. He had to struggle home sometime. The German fighters kept attacking him, and one stayed on his tail till his ammunition was exhausted, and still Johnson would not go down. His plane was able to get him back home. When he landed, Johnson started counting the bullet holes in his plane. There were over 200 when he stopped counting. So it was an incredible aircraft. There's lots of photos of P-47s coming back with the wings half gone and engine shot out. Very, very rugged, very, very tough. Another distinction it held is that it was flown by the highest scoring ace of the European theater, a Polish-American, Franciszek Griski. Also, it had a great range at its time, although it didn't prove to be the best escort fighter that they had hoped it to be. But it turned out to be an excellent ground attack aircraft. And here we have Seversky again with the P-35. And this is later in life. Now, Seversky lived until 1974, although he resigned from the Republic Aviation Company, eventually sued them, and won. He became a very well-known author and lecturer on aviation and air power. Alexander Kartveli ended up staying with Republic Aviation and helped design the groundbreaking F-84 and the iconic F-105. Now, through these presentations, I've been talking about Sikorsky and Seversky, and to the American ear, those names are very, they sound familiar. Easy to get them mixed up. This even happened in the press, and Seversky was asked during the 50s about all this confusion. And Seversky's reply was, and I quote, "Why straighten it out? Sikorsky gets credit for my work, and I get credit for his. So that's 200% for each of us." Which I think is a great way to look at this. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my presentation for today. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to especially thank Margarita here, who made all of this possible. All of the rest of the museum staff, Victor, my good friend and co-pilot Georgi, who could not be here today. I want to thank you all for coming, all of you out in Zoom land. Thank you. And if there's any questions or comments, love to hear.
More slides.
More slides. Yes.
Please.
That was the book I was showing you, and just a couple more slides about the book.
Yeah.
So,
Second.
thank you.
Yes, that's second. Most important part.
Oh, Did we get that going?
And so warfare becomes
This is
everybody's.
Seversky himself.
All of us must understand the strategy of war. No longer should it be a mystery open only to military minds. The strategy of war is simply a plan to defeat the enemy. In wars of the past, there were only two ways to do it. One was to kill up his army in order to lay hands on the source of his power. The other was to sink his navy, enforce a blockade, and starve him into submission. Along comes the airplane, and an entirely new method of defeating the enemy becomes possible. We can carry the war now over the head of his army and navy, strike directly at the source of his power, his war industries, and by destroying these war industries, automatically disarm and paralyze his fighting forces.
So this, in a nutshell, was Seversky's core message in this book. And I just want to point out that this book is extremely well written, and it's amazing how well written it is considering this was his second language. And as I said, he also became a prominent speaker, so he took a lot of classes in writing and speaking English, and he became, as I said, very successful as a commentator. So I believe that wraps it up. No, a couple more. We have more slides on it. All right, this is Seversky receiving the Harmon Trophy Award from President Truman. The Harmon Trophy Award is the highest aviation award that can be given to a designer or pilot. And all right, this is it. These are our references, and I also want to thank a couple of people that helped me. Dick Bennett, Edward Gala, who are on the Zoom right now. They were my World War I aviation advisors. Also, thanks to all of the other folks here at the Russian Museum who have been more than helpful and very, very welcoming to me. So. So, are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, so Sikorsky was Seversky's father, correct?
No.
No.
No. No. There was no blood relation that I'm aware of.
Oh.
Seversky's father was an entertainer and had a singing and dance troupe, and changed his name to Seversky.
Right.
But there's no blood connection. They did meet at some point in the 30s, but other than that, I don't know of any real connection between the two. Obviously, they knew of each other and were familiar with each other's work.
Okay. And where was he buried? Where was he buried?
Seversky?
Yes,
In New York.
in New York.
Yeah, he and his wife both settled in New York, and both interred in New York.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you all for coming. Stick around for the fun part. And I have models up here, and also a book about the China Clippers if you want to take a look at that. All right? So again, thank you so much for coming, folks.